Welcome back everyone. Today I'm going to be making realistic trees with sagebrush armatures. These are natural armatures that you can either pick yourself. They grow out in the west of the United States, or if you're like me and are in the Midwest and can't come by these naturally, you can order them off websites like Scenic Express. So I went ahead and I ordered their starter pack, their SuperSage starter pack. And so I'm going to go through the contents of this starter kit and also put together some trees using all the different flocks and materials and kind of give a review of not only sage armatures, but also this kit you can get from Scenic Express. So without further ado, let's go and look at what this kit entails. So here is the starter kit, and as you can tell, it comes with a lot of stuff. It comes with their super tree material, which I believe is the seafoam plant material you can sometimes find in hobby stores. We have the actual sagebrush armatures themselves. I think there's around 6 to 10 armatures in here. And then we have tons of different flocks. We got a spray bottle to make your own scenic glue. All right, several different kinds of glues here for, I think, protecting the flock and also for attaching that seafoam super tree material. That's this rubber adhesive here. And then we have 2 different shades of flock for our trees. We have a kind of a light olive green, and then we have a darker hunter green. This looks like the flock's a little different than what you'd see from Woodland Express. We have this something I'm really interested in, this leaf material, and they are supposedly supposed to simulate little leaves. All right, there's the hunter green, which I usually don't really like making trees out of, but I'll give it a shot. I'll make one out of them and see how it looks. Some more of that leaf material, which I'm looking forward to using. And then we have a ton of different highlights. We have, it looks like autumn blends of flock. We have light, fine turfs that we can use to make, I guess, different types of trees, flowering trees, autumn trees and spring trees, all sorts of things. And of course, some instructions. So there we go. This was all for $45. I went ahead and on their website and added up all the different materials, and it actually is around $70 worth of stuff, which you get for $45. So not a bad deal, especially if you're just getting started into terrain building. So here are the armatures now. They look pretty good. They're about 5 to 7 inches, most of them. A few are a little larger. And each one has an interesting shaped silhouette. One thing that I don't like about Woodland Scenics armatures is, well, they all look kind of the same. So first thing I'm going to do, since unlike Woodland Scenics, you don't have a base to put these on, we need to pin them to our own bases. So here I am just taking a little hand drill, drilling into the bottom of our sagebrush here. And then I will go ahead and I will drill through an MDF base, a 50mm base that I also beveled the edges to make it blend into my table a little bit better. And after that, I just took a piece of wire, I believe from a paper clip, and I'm going to stick it into the bottom of my tree here and then glue it onto the base with a little bit of super glue. And that's basically how I will attach all of these trees. So now that we got them based, we're going to trim off some of the excess branches. The instructions say to take every branch and trim them about 2 inches. I'm going to leave some of the bigger branches in place, but I'm really going to cut back at the smaller ones. It'll make placing the SuperSage a little bit easier, and you won't have big twigs sticking out of your flock to make it look unrealistic. And now, just to help protect the tree, I'm going over it with some watered down PVA glue. This again, I'm a little worried about these armatures not being as durable as you would find from Woodland Scenics that have kind of a wire core to them. So I want to be very careful, and so just going over with some PVA and letting it dry. And now for the most frustrating part of making these trees, which is attaching the SuperSage material. One thing I'll say, don't do what I did when I first started to try and make these trees and just hack off big pieces of the SuperSage and just try and glue it onto the branches using especially the glue they provide, which is this rubber glue, kind of like the sticky tack from Woodland Scenics. It doesn't work very well. Maybe if you're using a hot glue gun, you'd be able to attach these pieces, but I told myself I'd only be using the materials that came in this box to create these trees, and so I had a heck of a time trying to attach these things, as you can see here, with just the glue they provided. So what you want to be doing is just using small fronds from the super tree material and gluing those on individually one at a time. It's going to take forever, but it will stay in place much better than if you're trying to use bigger pieces. But as you can see, even this isn't that easy. I place the armature on its side and I'm kind of using gravity here to balance those pieces of super tree onto the armature and let them dry. And then once they dry, things do get easier. Once some of the canopy has dried, you can kind of balance new pieces of the super tree onto the old, and those glued down pieces will hold together the canopy, and you can kind of start making progress. But at first, it's a really slow, really arduous process, just trying to get a few pieces of that super tree on there. And it took, for each tree, probably about an hour to glue all these different fronds on. So it's definitely not a quick process. But when you see the final result, I really don't think you can really make trees any better than this. One last tip for attaching bigger pieces of seafoam to your tree: if you can find a place where a tree is branching off from the trunk, if you cut that down, you can use that as a wedge to hold in bigger pieces of seafoam, as you saw there. It makes the process go a little bit quicker. I started doing this near the end of the build and found that it was a great way to kind of bulk up the foliage in my trees rather quickly. And then as you see here, I'm going to kind of cover up that little area where I added that branch with some smaller pieces of seafoam, and when it dries, you won't even notice. Now that I've attached the seafoam to the armature, I'm going to be spraying it with some Scenic cement that was provided within the kit, and I'm giving it a nice coat on either side just to protect the seafoam, make sure it doesn't break or fall off as we're adding our flocks to it. So I do that with each one of my trees, let it dry overnight. So now it's time to flock our trees, and so I sprayed it with some 3M spray adhesive, and now I'm adding the spring green flock that's included in the kit. Now this flock's a little bit different than what you see from like coarse turf with Woodland Scenics. Woodland Scenics coarse turf is a little bit lighter. The foam is not quite as dense as this. Like, this foam is actually pretty heavy duty. And when you add it to the tree, it kind of gives nice silhouettes, makes the foliage a little denser. It's actually, I think, a better flock for flocking trees than what you might get with Woodland Scenics. So I was actually pleasantly surprised. It feels a bit strange, so I wasn't sure how it'd turn out. But in the end, I thought this flock made a nice full canopy for me. And now I'm going to spray it again with some more spray adhesive and add some of this super leaf material, which again, they look like tiny leaves, individual leaves, and I'm just going and I'm kind of coating most of the canopy. Again, it helps its silhouette. It also is a little bit lighter, so it gives a highlight to our tree here. And then after I add some of that super leaf, I'm going to spray it down with some more adhesive, and I'm going with the really light green highlight flock provided to give those high highlights just on the top of the canopy, places where we have the foliage jutting out. And there we go. There is our first tree done. If anything, I might have went a little too crazy on the foliage on this tree. It's not a huge tree, but it has this massive canopy. But at least I can tell you it looks really realistic. There's lots of openings. You can kind of see into the body of the tree. The silhouette looks really nice. I'm pretty pleased so far. So let's go ahead and make a few more trees. We're going to try all the different kinds of flocks. Next up, we're going to try and make a tree with the hunter green flock. And I'll just tell you right now, I don't really like this color of flock. It just looks so unnatural. When you look at greens out in nature, there's more yellow to them than this. This hunter green is not very realistic. But we'll go ahead and give it a shot. Maybe with some highlighting, it will look a bit better. So again, just covering it after spraying it with some 3M adhesive. Just covering all of the canopy, and really that seafoam material is just awesome. Just the kind of silhouette it gives, with some areas where some of the armature is still showing, where you can still see into the canopy. It's not so dense. I really like it. So for the highlight for this tree, I'm going to go pretty bold. I'm going to use that light green super leaf material, and I'm going to kind of generously place that over the canopy. And the highlight, I actually like this kind of stark highlight. Usually I don't have this big of contrast when I'm highlighting trees. But I think that's the only way to really make this dark green work. It looks pretty good. Maybe it's late in the day and there's not much sun out and it's only catching a few places on the leaves. I don't know. I might rethink dark green trees now. You just got to work with higher highlights. And so to really make the highlights pop, I'm taking that light green again and just hitting the top. And I'm pretty pleased. You know, as I said, I'm not a big fan of usually these hunter green trees, but with these really stark highlights, I think it looks pretty decent. So there you go. There's our second tree done. So now we're going to try our autumn phlox. And so I'm using kind of this red-yellow mixture that was provided, the coarse turf. And I'm placing that over it. And usually making autumn trees look good is really hard. It's really hard to get I think an accurate look to the leaves and the foliage. So what I'm doing is I'm being pretty sparse with how I'm putting on this flock. I'm leaving a lot of kind of open areas in the canopy, areas where leaves have probably already fallen off the tree. And I was worried that maybe you'd look at this tree and tell the different color between the branches and the armature and the SuperSage. But looking at it, I really don't think you can. So I'm glad that wasn't apparent. And now I'm going and I'm taking some of the fine turf, some of the fine yellow, and I'm sprinkling it all over the tree just to give a little bit more coverage over the seafoam material. And I'll also go over it with some red. Using this fine flock will give you some color, but still it won't obscure the body of the tree. It will still look a little sparse and bare. And then finally, just to put a little bit of green in there, just a little bit of green, I'm going to be using some of the darker green super leaf material, liberally putting that over the top of it, just again to help it look like, it's maybe that transition period in early fall. You still have some leaves on the tree, but they're turning. Some of the coarse flock was a little chunky, so I'm going to go back and probably remove some of those pieces. But overall, I think this gives a pretty accurate looking autumn tree, so I was actually pretty pleased with how that turned out as well. Alright, for our last tree, I thought maybe trying to flock it without using any coarse turf, seeing how the seafoam handled just some light, fine flock. So here I'm just taking that spring green highlight color and I'm going to go over all the seafoam with it, and this might be my favorite tree. I really like how this canopy turned out. I think it represents a smaller tree well with a thinner canopy. You can see more into the body of the tree. I think perhaps I should have used this technique with my first tree, which also was a smaller armature, but I gave it that huge canopy. I think it would have looked nicer, maybe holding off all of that dense clump foliage. But anyways, I think it looks really great, just lightly flocking that seafoam. It just looks really realistic, maybe like a flowering tree in early spring. It's really cool. And so now I'm going to go and I'm going to take some of that light green super leaf material and add that on top of it as well. Again, just to give a little bit more foliage, but you can see a lot of the tree structure still isn't obscured by the flock. It looks so incredible. I am so happy with how this tree in particular turned out. This will probably be my go-to method for the smaller armatures in the set. And then finally, I decided, you know what? Since we're going for a spring tree here, why not put a little bit of that red flock in there as highlights? Maybe there's some spring flowers, maybe it's some crab apples, or it's a Bradford pear or something. Put a little bit of that red in there just to give it some nice contrast in the canopy. So one of the final steps for these trees is to secure the base. So I have these guys on 50mm bases, and they're a little wobbly. Alright, they're a little top heavy with all of the canopies going on, but I still want to keep them at 50mm bases. I could go bigger, I could put them on 75mm bases, but I have a bunch of kind of tree stands that are set up to take 50mm MDF bases, so I want to be able to use these guys on those tree stands. So instead, I'm going to use a method that I actually started using with my Woodland Scenic armatures to make them a little bit more steady, especially when you're using them on their own. And so I'll be gluing down pebbles around the base and then covering it with DOS clay to weigh it down. Make sure your trees don't get knocked over while you're wargaming or fall over due to a slight breeze and break. And this is a great way to hold them down. It's not going to look great. I'm going to be honest with you. This is where we're going for wargaming practicality. You know, if you're making a diorama or something, you wouldn't want to do this. It's not going to look super realistic. but at least the clay will give like a slight slope to it, maybe look like it's on like a slight mound, small little hill, and it won't look too bad. Your focus will be on the tree. Your eye will be drawn to the foliage, not so much the base, and we'll also be covering it with some phlox, some different kinds of bushes to try and hide that kind of steep slope around its base. But again, this will ensure your tree stays upright, doesn't fall over in the middle of a match. You can probably rig up some fancy magnetizing, especially if you're using like GW bases. But since I like to use trees by themselves as kind of decorations on my board, I like to be able to just place them there and not worry about knocking them over constantly. So our very last step is to try and protect our terrain, because these trees are a bit fragile. And so I'm spraying it here with that Scenic glue, and I'm going to let it dry overnight. And then once that Scenic glue has dried, I'm going to go over it with a layer of hairspray, and that will help protect it. And I'm going to do this several times. So I'm going to do several layers of alternating between the Scenic glue and the hairspray until the canopy is pretty stiff. It seems pretty durable. And this will take several days, but in the end it will be worth it. You don't want to spend all this time making these fantastic trees only to have them break on you. And so here are my finished trees, and I have to admit that I think these sage trees are amazing. I don't know how I could go back to using those plastic armatures from other terrain companies. They just don't even compete with this. Now they are expensive, much more expensive per tree, but the quality speaks for itself. And as far as the Scenic Express kit, it's actually a pretty decent deal, especially if you're just starting out in terrain making and you don't already have a ton of different phlox and highlight colors. And I was especially impressed with that super leaf material. I thought it really added something to your typical foam phlox. So I'll probably end up buying more of these armatures, especially since I can't get a hold of the sagebrush naturally. But if you live out west, you have a great natural armature that you can get your hands on for free, and you'll be making more realistic trees than anyone else for your wargaming table. Now, you do have to remember that these are going to be much more fragile. You're going to have to take really delicate care with these trees. I'm going to be magnetizing them and putting them kind of in their own case for when I travel to my friendly local gaming store. So that is a consideration too. If you're really rough on your terrain, these might not be for you, but man, look at how good these look. And if you're making dioramas, I couldn't think of a better material to use. So hopefully you found this video informative. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you all soon. Take care.